we're going to turn our attention now to Ukraine. Lots of news coming out of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Western leaders have condemned plans now by 4 Russian-occupied regions to hold referendums in Ukraine on joining the Russian Federation.
NATO has called this move a sham. President Zelensky has said that it's evidence that Ukraine has the upper hand in the war. I want to get the view now, Defence Editor at the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. I know normally, Robert, you talk about, tactics and whatever, but this is tactics from the Russians. So they move into these areas, they kill and beat up people and blow the place to pieces. And then they say, but here's a poll. Do you want to stay? Do you want to be our friend and we'll not mess you about anymore or not? The UN saying a sham. Surely it is.
The other thing that is so worrying about this is that they're saying that most of the votes will be recorded remotely.
Yeah.
So this is Mr. Prigozhin of the Concord Catering Company and then head of the Troll Factory, who's now in charge of mercenaries for Ukraine, will be in charge of this one, and you'll get absolute gobbledygook coming out of it. But it's very ominous because every single one of these areas in which the 4 referenda are going to take place is not securely held by Russian troops now. They went in to defend Luhansk and Donetsk in the east, and as you were saying in your introduction, the Ukrainians are pushing in quite dramatically, still pushing into those areas. I mean, Donetsk airport itself could fall.
That these polls could be a military operation as well, basically because it then saves them having to secure those areas. If the people themselves say they fear what's coming and they say, look, OK, Russia, we'll go with you, then that actually saves all this offensive stuff.
No, we know what the result of these polls is going to be anyway, and it's a challenge. And what is happening with Putin is that he seems to be doubling down, but that's doubling down in Western civvy journo speak, but he's breaking one of the most fundamental military maxims, which is never reinforce failure. And that's what he is doing. The weakness in all of this is that Putin hasn't got the military power to do this. But what is worrying is the propaganda which is coming out of the parliament, the Duma, but particularly people like Olga Sokubaya, the great talking head on state television, saying, you'll be attacking Russian territory, so we're going to double down. You give better missiles, and then it means that Russia becomes within range. So Poland and even Ramstein, the great US base, comes within range. The trouble is, it is dangerous talk, which could cost an awful lot of lives. But what he is gambling on, what they're all gambling on, is that they'll split Europe over this. Time to say, let's get a deal at all costs. We really don't want more war on the eastern fringes of Europe, and perhaps we can get a deal over gas. But that is very much up in the air. But it is quite clear that Putin himself is the prisoner of even harder-lying people than he is. The speeches in the Duma over the past 2 weeks have been saying, let's eradicate Ukraine. I mean, saying dreadful things like that.
Is that a symptom of what I've been reading in the press, is that, some people speculating the 40% chance the war could be over this year. There's this increased pressure and panic in the Kremlin, not least with these rumours that were swirling last night that he was going to make his first address since that invasion in February, which he then cancelled. We've got reports that he's going to be recruiting convicted murderers and criminals from the prison to join the
We know he's doing that already,
group, which is terrifying. These kind of extreme changes of tax with the referenda as well. A man under pressure.
Yes. And indeed, the best commentary is saying, go back to COVID. I'm not being silly. Why didn't he have a general lockdown? Because he felt that such would be the reaction, that it would show that he's not in full control. This is why they're pushing him, these hardliners even by his standards, to have a full mobilization. But the view is that people will not respond to them. The laws, there were 3 laws in the last 36 hours rushed through the parliament saying that, if you refuse to fight, if you disobey orders, the death penalty in some cases. There is absolute desperation. And this is what some in the West have feared. Some really good commentators with long vision were saying back in February, you know, the prospect of some real sort of crack-up in the power apparatus in Russia is very dangerous for everybody. But we are where we are, and this is why I think Liz Truss was very strong in saying, no, we're not going to stop supporting. We are going to put what we put in already.
Here's the fascinating thing.
Yeah.
The Ukrainian army are not waiting for those reinforcements, are they? They are going out, they are pushing, they are recapturing Russian equipment and turning it round on them.
Yes, and that's what Western armies have got to learn from the Ukrainians. We're on a learning curve. I've talked to several Brits who've been out there with them. It's Roddy the Road Scout. They are absolutely amazing. You look at the pictures very carefully. When the Ukrainians capture a tank, what do they go for first? No, it's not a bit of the ammunition. It's the tracks. They take the caterpillars off the tanks and the carriers, bodge them up in very, very quick time, apparently, and so they got spares for their own forces. In fighting forces confronting them on this enormous front of 800 miles or so, there's now, can you believe it, from what we were saying back in February, there's almost parity between anything the Russians can bring forward
Yes.
and what the Ukrainians are doing. And the Ukrainians do have one strength, and it's what's called the moral component. And it doesn't mean say, I'm good, you're bad. It's the strength in believing what you're doing. And the Ukrainians believe in what they're doing because it's survival.
So
and a lot of the Russians
do we not
don't.
believe in what we're seeing? I mean, you say the Russians don't have the military might, and I'm thinking, well, there's only two big superpowers in the world, the USA or Russia. And you see, you know, on May Day, the Red
The
Square
parade,
and the
yeah.
military march by, whatever. And Ukraine, well, I never thought of as any sort of military might at all. And you're saying that they can out-militarize the Russians.
Well, because they maneuver much better.
Yeah.
They're doing a kind of extraordinary thing. We talk, one of these fancy phrases you both know. Oh, what does it really mean? Hybrid warfare. But this is a make-do war that the Ukrainians have put together. No, it isn't a modern army like the best of NATO, the best divisions that you would get, particularly from the Americans. But it's getting there. And the one thing that we don't see, and I would like to understand more and more, and it's the bit that they're not telling us about for very good reason, this is the first digitalized war. And a lot of these people, you see these HIMARS artillery and so on, it's the info they're getting about targets, which is so quick, so rapid, and so networked. And I think two NATO powers, above all others, have been particularly strong in helping that. And it's the US, and funny enough, the UK.